Hey, what's going on everyone, and welcome back to the Bimmer barn. Today we're going to be replacing the rear main seal and the front main seal on my 335i motor, since we're going to be servicing this entire drivetrain while it's out of the car before it goes into my wagon body. So I have a couple of tricks to share with you about replacing these seals. Hopefully they come out all right. I think we might have a little trouble with the front main seal, but I hope you guys learned something from this video, and if you enjoy this sort of content, be sure to drop a like down below. Now, without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Oh, and by the way, we bought a ton of other stuff from FCP Euro, so I'm going to do a quick unboxing here and show you guys a sneak peek of the videos to come to the channel. Now in front of me here, we have the front main seal and then the rear main seal, and I took this one out of the box to show you how we're going to install it. This one's really easy because it's located in front of the front engine pulley, so we just have to take that off in order to get access and then pull it off and reinstall this. But the rear main seal is going to be a lot more difficult because it goes behind the transmission, so we're going to have to pull that transmission off to replace that seal and probably make a ton of mess with all the fluid that's going to come out of it. Now here you see some RTV, well, it's JB Weld technically, but it's red silicone high temp gasket sealer, and this is what we're going to use on the sides of the front and the rear main seal in order to get the proper OE seal from factory. So usually they would recommend from factory that you use a 2-part sealant, and it's supposed to go into this channel here, fill it up, and also meet with the grooves of the engine where the 2 halves of the block meet, and it's supposed to fill that gap and make sure that it seals really well. It's on both sides of the front main seal and the rear main seal as well. And the materials to do that gasket, it's about $80 just to put some what looks to me like RTV. So we are instead going to use some of this high temp RTV here and test it out, and that way I will be able to test this and see if it's able to make a good seal, and I'll be able to update at the end of this build once we've driven and put a ton of miles on it and tell you whether we have a good RTV to use for this procedure. So let's go ahead and start with the front main seal here and see if we can get that thing off, and then we'll start installing this here. So here we're going to try my first method of getting the seal out, and that was going to be by tapping a small pilot hole into the front face of the seal and then screwing a self-tapping screw into it and then trying to pull it out. This usually works for rear main seals, but here in the front main seal I just kept on breaking the screw threading and I just couldn't get the seal to come with the screw itself. So we tried this a few times in a few different positions. We even tried doubling up the screws at the same time to see if it would help us get more leverage and more grip on the seal, but it did not want to come out. So I saw someone else online, they kind of just pried at the seal with a pry bar, but that did not yield me any results, just kind of destroyed the seal. So what I turned to was using a flat straight pick and going in between the seal and the outer casing, basically the casing of the motor, and trying to collapse the seal so that it wasn't putting as much tension on the casing of the motor, and that way I could pull it out a little more easily. So that's what I did, and finally it did get the seal loose and we were able to remove it from the motor. I wouldn't really recommend this style of removing the seal, but it worked for me, and it did leave a couple of marks, little scratch marks on the casing of the motor. But in a second we're going to go ahead and replace the seal and use some extra RTV around the outside of it to hopefully fill those scratches, and that way we don't have any oil leak in the future. Now what I'm doing here is I'm using a cup that's the same size of the seal to tap it in. This is a really handy method, probably the best way to get the seal in. And yeah, that's as easy said as it is done. Alright, so we're all done installing the front main seal, and I was hoping that would go a little bit smoother, but it definitely took a lot of work to get that seal out, and it's because I didn't use the special tool. So I was thinking that it would work with my usual method of drilling into the seal and then putting a screw in it and then trying to pull the screw out. You saw me try that a few times, but
I think just because of how thick this seal is, I mean, look at how wide or how deep it goes into there. Because of that, I think that there's just so much friction holding it in that it didn't want to come out. So we tried multiple times, and then eventually I just had to say screw it, and I started collapsing the seal in from the outside, and then we were able to pull it through once all that pressure was relieved. I think we got the alignment pretty good as well, maybe a little bit deeper in there than the factory. So if you're pushing in one of these, I would recommend really slowly getting it in at the end, because you do not want to go too far past the factory location. Otherwise, you're not going to get a good seal with the crankshaft here. So I'm hoping for the best, and I will definitely keep you guys updated. If it starts leaking, it'll be pretty obvious because it'll leak down the front of the motor here. But if you were to ask me, I would say that that is a 100% good seal, and I don't think that we're going to get any oil from there in the future. So the next thing for us to do is to move the engine into a position that's a little bit easier for us to service the transmission. And we need to drain the transmission, take off the lines, and then we need to loosen the flex plate that goes to the torque converter with the 6 bolts. And then we need to pull the transmission off to get access to the rear main seal. So let's go ahead and do that now. That copper looking stuff, that was not in this pan before we started draining this fluid. So that is it's very weird to find. We have a little bit of coloration over here, not sure, could be condensation, a lot of things, but man, actually a little glittery here in the transmission. So good thing that we have a service kit though, because we want to make sure we don't have any issues in the future. And the car was not throwing any transmission codes before, so that was good, but definitely probably never been serviced before. So now with those 6 bolts removed from the flex plate going to the torque converter, all we need to do is release the bolts that hold the bell housing of the transmission to the engine block, and hopefully this thing pulls off nice and easy. So everything was going smoothly until I got to this bolt on the side of the transmission here, and I realized that this thing was cross-threaded and it did not want to come out. So I got my ratcheting wrench and tried to get this thing broken free by rocking it back and forth, but finally the bolt head just snapped off completely, and that's when I knew I was in trouble. Well, I hope you guys just saw that, because I totally just snapped the bolt that was in the transmission there. Dang it! Looks like it was only held on by 1 bolt. Look, I didn't even take this bolt out. It was already missing. And this was loose. And what I realized is as soon as I tried loosening the bolt for this, since it was already backed out some, I didn't know why it was backed out, but it was tight in there. And I tried rocking it forward and backwards,
but it didn't want to come out, guys. So we'll be able to get the transmission out, no problem. Basically, this is just a stud now, like a guide stud. But we do have the opportunity to put a bolt in here. Just need to get a replacement one. And these are made out of aluminum, like a stretch aluminum, I believe. So we should, in theory, be able to drill the stud out, tap it, and reuse that bolt hole and just put a fresh bolt in there. But for now, it is what it is. But let's go ahead and keep pulling these bolts off. Hopefully none other break, but that one was probably broken because when you install the downpipes, I think you have to take that bracket off. I just don't know why it was cross-threaded into the block here. So let's keep pulling the rest of the bolts and then get this transmission off. All right, so this rear main seal has definitely been leaking for a while. Ton of oil buildup on the back of the engine housing here and all the way at the bottom. And then you can see that the torque converter picks it up on the flex disc side and it throws it all around the outer rim here. And that little bit of fluid there, that's actually from the transmission from when I pulled off the torque converter. But you can see that it's really dry in there otherwise, so I don't think that it's got any active leak from the transmission input shaft. So we definitely need to clean all this stuff up. And here we're gonna go ahead and pull off the rear main seal using my drill and screw method. Hopefully it comes out nice, and then we'll reinstall the new one. And same thing as the front main seal, we're gonna have to use a little bit of extra RTV on the corners where the block housings meet, and that way we'll have a really good seal and no oil leak in the future. So now we've got our rear main seal installed. We even cleaned up the engine block here, as well as the transmission bell housing, and installed our torque converter now as well too. So everything is looking clean and almost ready to go back together. However, you remember guys, we broke off this bolt here. I thought that this was just missing a bolt, but it looks like it snapped off inside of the block here. And I'm also looking here and I realized, well, it looks like there's one more bolt hole that should have had a bolt through it. And looking over here on the transmission, look at this. There's the rest of that bolt right there. So we have just got 3 big broken bolts on this side. I don't know why, but what I'm thinking is we should probably at least try to tackle this one, because while this one is a stud, it kind of does provide some some help for the transmission to stay on. So let's try this one out right here. It's snapped clean off with the housing of the motor. Since these are aluminum stretch bolts, I think it might be easy to drill through. So we'll get a cobalt bit out and have to drill through this bolt.
and then probably, hopefully not, but probably have to tap the threads to make sure that we can get a fresh bolt in there. I don't have any bolts, but you know, we can always head down to the hardware store, you know, order them and put them on the car later, because these are in a really easy area to access, especially with the downpipes off. So I'd imagine that if we just got these threads cleaned up for now, that we could put new bolts in there in the future. But you know, that's just speaking ahead of myself. First things first, let's see if we can get this thing out. So here we were, so close to making some progress on the hole that we were trying to make, like a pilot hole through this, you know, cross-threaded bolt here. And I just made one simple mistake and broke off the drill bit inside of the bolt there. So it is clean flush with the block. So yeah, that really sucks. We were really close to the end. You know, it's so long, the bolt here. It's probably like almost an inch and a quarter. So we were really using the full length of the bit, as you can see there. But now what I've gone and done is I bought a ton of cobalt bits, you know, because usually the small bits like this, it is common for them to snap and break because of how, you know, small they are, or they can get dull pretty quickly. Now I realized that I was paying $3 for a single bit at the hardware store or at Lowe's or Home Depot. That's what they really go for. And I figured that was normal price, but on Amazon, guys, I found these things for $1 a piece. So you can buy them in 12 packs or in 10 packs, and you save so much more money. You're getting them for $1 a piece. So I'll put a link to these in the description below. But if you're planning to do any sort of bolt extraction, you're gonna definitely need some cobalt bits. Remember that you're supposed to go at a low speed with these things, and it really lets it cut away the material. But now, like I said, since we have that bolt stuck in there, we're going to use some of these bits around it on the top and the bottom, try to make some area clear around the drill bit, and then I want to try to pull it out with some pliers, because that way we'll just be able to get back to work on that hole. It's almost done, and then we can start drilling the whole thing out and then eventually tap the block here. So let's go ahead and get to work. Can't believe that worked. Sweet, that was pretty easy. We got it out. Now we can go ahead and get to continue drilling this hole out here, and then we'll go bit by bit, larger in size, until either the bolt comes out on its own or we just re-thread the entire hole in the block. So let's go ahead and knock this out, then we'll put the flywheel on and get the transmission onto the back of the motor here, buy those new bolts and replace them eventually, but they're really easy to access right there by the downpipes. And then we'll call this a successfully finished job.
Perfect.
Finally, it's late in the night here, but at the last second, that old bolt decided to come out. We were able to punch it through the hole and then re-tap the threads just to make sure that they were extra clean. And now look at this. This bolt comes in and out so smoothly and nice and straight as well, reusing the factory bolt threading. So we know that that's going to be a good, nice thread to use once we get those bolts in the mail. But for now, I think we're ready to reassemble the flywheel and put the transmission back onto the motor. Alright, so with the transmission installed, almost all the bolts are torqued down besides the 3 that we're missing on this side. And the last thing that we do have to do is install the bolts that go from the torque converter to the flex plate. They were a little bit easier to remove than they are to install, especially since I can't see anything and I have very little clearance here under the motor. So we're going to save that, as well as replacing those 3 bolts for when the transmission is in the car, and that way we'll be able to turn it over and be able to see where the bolt holes are in order to line them up and get those bolts torqued down correctly. We also have to do the transmission service once it's in the air as well, so a lot of work to do there just to make sure that it's tip-top before we even start it for the first time. So there you have it. That's going to conclude our video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed watching and you learned something about replacing the rear main seal on your 335i. Obviously, the procedure is going to be a little bit more difficult if your engine and transmission is in the car, because you're going to have to get some sort of transmission jack or a friend to help you get the transmission off of the motor, and then reinstalling it is going to be pretty difficult as well. But the procedure should be exactly the same, and with the trick of using a drill bit and a self-tapping screw, makes it really easy to pull that rear main seal out. As far as the front main seal, I'm going to go ahead and put a link to the special tool down in the description below so you guys know exactly what the right tool is to do the procedure. I wouldn't really recommend what I did today to get yours out, but if you're on a time crunch and you got to build it and you're willing to use a little bit of RTV, then it might work out for you. Anyways, let me know what you guys thought of this video down in the comments below, and be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new and you haven't yet, and as always, I hope everyone has an awesome day. We'll see you next time.
Perfect.